My old neighbor, who everyone thought was strange, left me a box. What I found inside left me in tears. I grew up in a small American suburb where everyone pretended to care, but mostly just wanted the latest neighborhood gossip. The kind of place where dads competed over lawn stripes, moms flexed their latest Target hauls, and kids either played Little League or got in trouble at the 7-Eleven. Picture perfect on the outside, but my life? Not so much. My family? Let's just say, if there was a contest for blatant favoritism, my parents would take home the championship ring. My sister, Emma, was the MVP of our household. Straight A student, star of every school play, the kind of kid parents love bragging about on Facebook. Me? I was the punchline. Emma got brand new UGGs for Christmas. I got socks. Not even the good kind, just the ones that came in a multi-pack from Walmart. At first, I thought maybe money was tight. But then I saw the brand new iPhone they gifted Emma for her birthday, while I got a $20 gas card. Put it toward your future, kid, my dad said, like I was supposed to fuel my dreams 1 gallon at a time. Unlike Emma, I wasn't handed anything. If I wanted something, I had to hustle. After school, while Emma was at dance practice or drinking overpriced smoothies with her friends, I was at the local burger joint, smelling like fried oil and regret. My parents never slipped me a 20 just because. If I needed gas money, I had to pull an extra shift. If I wanted new sneakers, I had to pray for a Black Friday sale. If I asked for help, my dad would remind me how he worked 3 jobs at my age, even though I'm pretty sure one of those jobs was getting free rent from Grandpa. Emma, meanwhile, had a bank account that never seemed to run dry. She had brand new clothes every season, expensive skincare products, and the latest gadgets. She had no clue what it meant to stretch a dollar. She lived in a world where Starbucks orders were customized down to the exact number of ice cubes, and somehow my parents always had money for that. It wasn't just my parents, though. My uncle, who owned a car dealership and thought that made him a business mogul, loved to remind me of my place in life. Some people are winners. Some people work for winners, he'd say, cutting into a prime rib at Thanksgiving while I ate dry turkey. My dad would nod along, my mom would chuckle, and Emma, she'd smirk like she already had a corner office waiting for her. I'd sit there, gripping my plastic fork like it was a lifeline. I wanted to say something to prove them wrong, but what could I say? I had no money, no car, no plan, just a job that barely paid above minimum wage, and a future that looked like one long shift at a drive-through window. Even at school, things weren't much better. Teachers didn't expect much from me. Coaches never considered me for teams. And while other kids planned their dream colleges, I was just trying to figure out how to cover next month's car insurance. Not that I even had a car. I was still saving up for one, while Emma was already bored of the SUV she got for her Sweet 16. The worst part? No one expected anything from me. It was like they had already decided I was going to be stuck in this town forever. Emma was destined for success. I was just a kid making her fries. I knew I had to get out. Somehow, some way, I had to break free from this cycle. I wasn't going to be stuck serving people like my uncle, watching my sister live the life I never had. I just didn't know how. Yet, Mrs. Jenkins was always there, sitting on her porch, watching everything like a human security camera. She had this piercing stare that made you feel like she could see straight through your soul. The neighborhood kids loved making fun of her. Nothing major, just dumb kid stuff, calling her a witch, daring each other to step onto her yard, running away screaming if she so much as blinked in their direction. It wasn't right, but no one really did anything about it. One time, I caught one of the local punks shaking up a can of spray paint, aiming to tag up her white picket fence with something stupid. Probably a crude drawing or some lame insult. Without thinking, I snatched the can out of his hand and tossed it into the nearest storm drain. As the kid hesitated for a second, glaring at me like I'd ruined his big moment, I caught movement from the corner of my eye. I turned and saw Mrs. Jenkins watching from her window, her gaze steady, like she had been taking in every second of what just happened. She had been there the whole time, silently observing, her eyes locked onto me like she was trying to read my mind. Then, with an exaggerated huff, the kid stomped off, probably running home to spin the story in his favor. I didn't even think much of it until A few hours later, my dad called me into the living room. There stood Mr. Henderson from next door, his arms crossed, his son fake crying beside him. "Your boy assaulted my son," he said, as if I had body slammed him onto concrete. My dad sighed, rubbing his temples. "Lucas, what did you do now?" I explained what actually happened, but no one wanted to hear it. According to them, I had humiliated their kid. My dad told me to stop picking fights, and my mom apologized on my behalf. Emma, of course, took the opportunity to throw in her 2 cents. "Nice job, loser. You're going to make us the weird family all because of some crazy old bat." I just shrugged. She's an old woman. She deserves respect. Emma rolled her eyes so hard I thought they'd get stuck that way. Life went on as usual. School, work, avoiding unnecessary conversations with my parents. But every time I passed Mrs. Jenkins' house, I couldn't help but wonder what her deal was. Everyone had their theories. Some said she used to be rich and lost everything. Others claimed she never had a family, and that's why she never left the house. Some kids swore she was part of some secret government experiment. One afternoon, after an exhausting shift at the burger joint, I was trudging home when I saw her. She was walking back from the store, dragging a heavy-looking grocery bag. It must have weighed a ton because, right before she made it to her porch, the bottom gave out, sending cans and boxes rolling down the sidewalk. She just stood there, staring down at the mess like she was too tired to even be annoyed. People walked past, pretending not to notice. Figures. I sighed, walked over, and started picking up the scattered groceries. She watched me the whole time, but didn't say a word. When I finished, I handed her the last can, and for the first time ever, she actually spoke. Her voice was raspy, like she didn't use it much. "Tea," she said. Just one word. I blinked. What?" She nodded toward her house. "Come in. Tea." I didn't exactly have plans, unless you count lying in bed and regretting my life choices. So I figured, why not? I followed her inside, half expecting it to smell like mothballs and sadness, but instead it smelled like cinnamon and something vaguely nostalgic. The place was neat but cluttered, like someone had lived there for decades without ever throwing anything away. The furniture was old but well-kept, and framed pictures lined the walls. She motioned for me to sit at the kitchen table while she shuffled to the stove, moving with the slow precision of someone who had lived through too much. The kettle whistled after a few minutes, and she poured 2 cups of tea, setting one in front of me. The mug was a faded blue with a tiny chip on the rim. I didn't say anything at first, just stared at the swirling steam. I had no idea why I was here. Maybe because no one had ever really acknowledged me before. Not like this. Not with intention. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. "I saw what you did, with the boy and the fence." I shrugged. It was nothing. She shook her head. "No, it wasn't." For the first time in a long while, I felt like someone actually saw me. Not just looked at me, saw me, and that changed everything. The tea was surprisingly good. Warm, slightly sweet, with a hint of something floral. I sat at her kitchen table, the wood worn smooth from years of use. The house around me felt like a step back in time. Like the 80s had moved in and never left. Faded wallpaper, a rotary phone on the wall, and old ceramic figurines lined up neatly on the shelves. The kind of place that had history woven into its walls. The scent of cinnamon mixed with something faintly like old paper and lemon cleaner. It was oddly comforting, like a home-cooked meal on a rainy day. She wrapped her bony hands around her cup, taking slow sips, watching me like she was deciding if I was worth talking to. Then, without preamble, she started speaking. Not about me, about herself. Her kids lived far away, she said. Different states, different lives. They called sometimes, sent a Christmas card if they remembered. But mostly, it was just her and this big, quiet house. She didn't sound bitter about it, just resigned, like she had made peace with being alone. She had raised them, sent them off into the world, and now all she had left of them were occasional phone calls and the pictures that lined the hallway. A few framed school photos, some outdated graduation pictures, one of them at Disney World when they were young. wearing those oversized mouse ears. But when she spoke about her husband, everything changed. Her eyes softened, and the lines on her face seemed less harsh. He had been gone for years, she said, but there wasn't a day that went by when she didn't think about him. They had been married young, right out of high school, back when love was about stolen glances at drive-in movies and dancing in the living room to records that skipped. He had been a big basketball guy, obsessed with the sport in a way that only true fans were. She chuckled lightly, shaking her head. "You should have seen him during a game," she said, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. If the Bulls were playing, forget about trying to have a conversation. He had even gone to see Michael Jordan play in person back in the day. Something, she said, he talked about like it was the greatest moment of his life. Not their wedding, not the birth of their kids, Michael Jordan. It made me laugh a little, and she smiled, like she was relieved someone else found it amusing too. Basketball wasn't just a game to him. It was his passion, and his real obsession? Collecting cards. Not just any cards, but the rare ones, the ones people would fight over. He'd spend hours reading about them, trading, hunting for the best deals. She rolled her eyes a little when she said it, but I could tell she didn't actually mind. It had been his thing, his escape from work and bills, and everything else life threw at them. After he passed, she had packed up most of his things, but the cards, those, she never touched. They were still sitting in an old box in the attic, collecting dust, forgotten. She said she never really knew what to do with them. They had meant the world to him. But to her, they were just pieces of cardboard with pictures of sweaty men on them. So they stayed there untouched year after year. "I always meant to go through them," she admitted, tapping her fingers lightly on the rim of her cup. "But I just never did." I sat there, listening, not sure what to say. Something about the way she talked about him, with this mix of love and quiet sadness, made me feel like I was intruding on something personal. But she didn't seem to mind. In fact, it almost felt like she wanted someone to remember him, even if that someone was just some kid who randomly walked into her life after picking up a few spilled groceries. She stared into her tea for a long moment before finally looking up at me. Mrs. Jenkins stood up slowly, her chair creaking as she pushed it back. Without a word, she disappeared into the hallway, her small frame barely making a sound as she moved. I sat there, unsure whether I was supposed to follow her or just wait. The tea in my hands had gone lukewarm, but I sipped it anyway, my fingers drumming lightly against the side of the cup. The old clock on the wall ticked loudly, filling the silence with a rhythmic beat. After a minute or two, I heard the sound of something being dragged. Then she returned, carrying an old, worn-out shoebox. The thing looked ancient, edges frayed, the cardboard slightly discolored like it had been sitting in an attic for decades. She placed it on the table in front of me and let out a long breath, as if she had been carrying something far heavier than just a box. She tapped the lid lightly with one finger before speaking. Her voice was softer now, almost distant, like she was talking to someone who wasn't in the room. She had been watching me for years, she said. She had noticed the way my family treated me, how I was always the afterthought. It wasn't pity, she assured me, but something deeper. She saw someone who deserved more than what they were given, and she knew, without a doubt, that her late husband would have liked me. She smiled faintly as she talked about him, how he was the type of man who could talk about basketball for hours, how he had once driven halfway across the country just to see a game live. She said he had a good heart, and he always believed in sharing what he loved with the right people. And that's why she was giving me this. I hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside, neatly stacked, were dozens of old basketball cards. Some were in plastic sleeves, others just loosely piled together, but they all had the same faded, nostalgic feel. I didn't know much about cards, but I knew enough to recognize some of the names. Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James. Some had autographs. Others had that shiny holographic look that screamed collector's item. I swallowed, unsure what to say. It felt wrong, taking something so personal. But Mrs. Jenkins just waved a hand, as if she could already hear the protests forming in my head. She wasn't giving them away lightly, she said. She had held on to them for years, not knowing what to do with them. But now she was sure. She wasn't going to be around much longer. She told me matter-of-factly. It wasn't sad or dramatic, just a simple fact she had come to accept. And before she left, she wanted to know that something her husband had loved so much wouldn't just collect dust in a forgotten corner. Maybe, she said, they could help me in some way. Maybe they still had some worth. I wasn't sure what to say, so I just nodded and carefully closed the lid. Thank you felt too small, too casual for something like this, but it was all I had. When I got home that night, I placed the box under my bed without much thought. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate it. I did, but life was life, and I had other things to worry about. Work, school, avoiding unnecessary arguments with my dad. The shoebox sat there, untouched, hidden away like some forgotten relic from another time. I didn't even think about checking what was inside beyond that first glance. To me, it was just an old woman's memory box, a sentimental gesture that I didn't fully understand. I had no idea yet that inside that box was the key to everything, and that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't even imagine. The shoebox sat under my bed for weeks, untouched. Life kept moving. School, work, the usual nonsense with my family. Every time I saw it, I'd think about Mrs. Jenkins and her husband, about how much those cards had meant to him. But to me, they were just old pieces of cardboard. One night, after a particularly brutal shift at work, I came home exhausted. The kind of tire where your feet feel like cement blocks and the thought of doing anything productive is a joke. I collapsed onto my bed and saw the shoebox peeking out from underneath. For no reason other than boredom, I grabbed it and pulled it onto my lap. I lifted the lid and shuffled through the stacks of cards, flipping them over like a deck of playing cards. Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James. The names were familiar, but I had no idea if they were actually worth anything. Some had signatures. Others had that holographic shine that made them look expensive, but I wasn't exactly an expert. I grabbed my phone and opened Google. Most valuable basketball cards. A list popped up, and right at the top, 1986 Fleer, Michael Jordan rookie card. My stomach did a weird little flip. That name looked familiar. I dug through the box again and pulled out a card in a plastic sleeve. Same design, same pose, same everything. I blinked. Nah, no way. I typed the name into eBay and sorted by sold listings. The first result, $200,000. The second, $250,000. Some had even gone for more. I dropped my phone, literally dropped it onto the bed like it was on fire. My heart was hammering now. I scrambled to the rest of the box, looking for anything else that matched what I had seen online. 2003 Upper Deck Exquisite Collection LeBron James rookie card, $500,000. 1996 Topps Chrome Kobe Bryant rookie card, $150,000. I wasn't just sitting on some old man's collection. I was sitting on a gold mine. My chest tightened, and before I even realized it, my vision blurred. Tears welled up and rolled down my face. I never cried. Not when my dad called me a disappointment. Not when I worked double shifts just to barely afford gas. But this was different. I had heard stories of people winning the lottery, stumbling upon fortunes, but that stuff didn't happen to people like me. The biggest stroke of luck I'd ever had was finding a crumpled $100 bill on the sidewalk once. And now, I was staring at over $1 million in basketball cards. After a few minutes, I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and tried to think straight. As insane as this was, something didn't sit right. Mrs. Jenkins had given me these cards freely, like they were nothing. She had no idea they were worth this much. And as much as I wanted to keep them and change my life forever, I knew deep down what I had to do. The next morning, I barely slept. As soon as the sun came up, I grabbed the shoebox and headed to Mrs. Jenkins' house. She opened the door, her usual calm expression unchanged, like she had been expecting me. I stepped inside, took a deep breath, and told her everything, that the cards weren't just old collectibles, that they were worth over $1 million. I braced myself for shock, for disbelief, maybe even anger, but she just smiled. "See," she said, "I was right about you. You have a good heart, And not even money could change that. That's rare these days. I felt my throat tighten again, and I quickly looked away, blinking hard. But it didn't matter. The tears came anyway. She patted my arm gently and told me that the cards were mine. She was happy they could change my life. Then, almost casually, she mentioned that she was moving. Her house was already sold, and she'd be heading to another state to be closer to her children. Over the next few days, I visited her a few more times, just to talk. Then, one morning, she was gone. The house stood empty, a sold sign staked into the yard. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like something was about to change. Not just because of the money, but because of the kind of person I had decided to be. The morning after Mrs. Jenkins left, I sat on my bed, staring at the shoebox like it was a ticking time bomb. The reality had settled in. This wasn't just some lucky break. It was a massive, life-changing secret. And I had to keep it that way. There was no way I could tell my family. Not now. Not ever. My dad would act like it was his divine right to control the money. My mom would talk about how it should bless the whole family. And my sister? Oh! Emma would absolutely lose it. She'd start tallying up all the ways she deserved a cut, her birthday gifts, her clothes, her future. They'd turn on me the second they realized I had something they wanted. Nope, not happening. I grabbed my laptop and started researching. First, I needed to figure out how to sell these cards without drawing attention. eBay seemed too risky, too many scammers, too much exposure. I needed something bigger, more legitimate. I found a few high-end auction houses that specialize in sports memorabilia, places where the real collectors went. These weren't just people looking for a cool addition to their shelves. These were sharks who threw down six figures like they were buying lunch. The more I read, the more I realized how complicated this was. Selling rare cards wasn't as easy as handing them over and cashing a check. There were authentication processes, grading systems, and middlemen who took a cut. Some auctions even required proof of ownership history, like a card's own little resume. I needed a plan. Step 1, get the cards professionally graded. The better the condition, the more they'd be worth. Step 2, find a trusted auction house that wouldn't screw me over. Step 3, sell them strategically, not all at once. If I flooded the market, the value could drop. Step 4, disappear. By disappear, I didn't mean vanish completely, but I wasn't planning on sticking around to let my family guilt-trip me into handing over my fortune. Once I had the money, I was out. New city, new life. No more coming home to passive-aggressive comments at the dinner table. No more feeling like an afterthought, while Emma basked in the golden child spotlight. But until then, I had to act normal. And that part, that was brutal. At breakfast, my dad grumbled about how I was wasting my potential working at a dead-end job instead of taking more shifts. My mom reminded me that family looks out for each other, which, in her language, meant I needed to contribute more to household expenses. Emma barely looked up from her phone, except to make some snarky comment about how I still didn't have a decent car. If only they knew I was sitting on a 7-figure collection while eating stale cereal. I played along, nodding at the right moments, pretending I cared. Meanwhile, every spare moment I had was spent deep diving into the world of collectors, learning their language, their habits, the best ways to stay under the radar. I joined online forums, lurking in threads where serious buyers talk shop. One night, I reached out to a guy who had sold a rare Jordan rookie card the year before. His post had gotten a lot of traction in the community, and from what I could tell, he wasn't some amateur seller. He was the real deal. I sent him a message, keeping it vague at first, just asking for advice. He replied fast. Too fast. Depends on what you got. You looking to move something big? I hesitated. I didn't want to tip my hand too soon. Just looking for guidance. I typed back. Hypothetically, if someone had a few high-value cards, what's the safest way to sell? His response was blunt. Stay off eBay. Too many scams. Get them graded first. Go through an auction house with a good rep. Avoid anyone who promises cash deals up front. That's how you get robbed. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. This was real. This was happening. Step 1. get the cards graded. That meant sending them to one of the big grading companies, where they'd inspect every inch, checking for flaws, centering, and authenticity. A high grade could mean the difference between a card selling for $100,000 or $500,000. The problem? The process took time, and time was something I couldn't afford to waste. I needed to be smart, careful. I packed up the cards in a secure case and started looking at shipping options. If anyone at home asked, I'd just say I was mailing something for work. Nobody cared enough to pry too much anyway. As I sealed the package, a thought hit me. This wasn't just about money. This was my escape plan. My one shot at getting out for good. And I wasn't going to blow it. I thought about how crazy it was, how I had gone from scraping together gas money to plotting $1 million exit strategy. It felt unreal, like one of those stories you'd see online about someone finding a priceless painting at a garage sale. Except this was happening to me. And the weirdest part? No one had a clue. Not my dad, still lecturing me about hard work. Not my mom, assuming I'd be stuck in this house forever. Not my sister, treating me like background noise. I had all the power now, and for the first time in my life, I was the one making the rules. The day I got the confirmation email, my hands were shaking. The auction house had authenticated the cards. Every single one of them. Not only were they real, but they were in such pristine condition that collectors would practically be throwing money at me. This wasn't just a lucky find. This was generational wealth sitting in an old shoebox. I knew I couldn't just start listing these on eBay like some dude selling his childhood Pokemon collection. I needed a real plan. So I did what any rational person would do. I found a financial advisor. Turns out, when you're suddenly sitting on a fortune, you don't just walk into a bank and say, "Hey, can I deposit $1 million in small bills?" You need structure, protection, a strategy, and most importantly, a way to keep greedy hands away from your money. Looking at you, Dad, I found a guy, David Whitaker. He worked with high net worth individuals, athletes, and lottery winners, the ones who didn't blow their money on gold-plated jet skis. I set up a meeting, doing my best not to sound like some kid who just stumbled into wealth by accident. The first thing he told me, you need a trust, a separate bank account. And for the love of everything, do not tell your family how much you have. Best advice I'd ever gotten. We set up an account that only I could access, separate from my regular bank, completely locked down. No way for anyone else to touch it. Not even if they had my social security number and my first pet's name. The trust would shield my identity from public records, meaning no random relatives I hadn't spoken to in years could suddenly start calling me their favorite nephew. Then came the big moment, my first sale, the 1986 Fleer Michael Jordan rookie card. Bidding started at $50,000. Within an hour, it hit $100,000. I kept refreshing the page, watching the numbers climb like I was checking the score of a game in overtime. $150,000. $175,000. $200,000. Final bid? $215,000. I had just made more money in one night than my parents had made in the last 5 years combined, and they were still nagging me about taking extra shifts at work. Over the next few weeks, I sold a handful of other cards, spacing out the sales to keep demand high. The LeBron James Upper Deck, $500,000. The Kobe Bryant Topps Chrome, $175,000. By the time I was done, my account balance was creeping toward $1 million. $1 million. I couldn't wrap my head around it. This was the kind of money that people worked their entire lives for, the kind that got you a house in a nice neighborhood, the kind that meant you never had to check your bank balance before ordering extra guac at Chipotle. But I wasn't about to be reckless. I took Whitaker's advice and rented a safety deposit box at the bank, storing the remaining cards there. No reason to sell everything at once. The value would only go up over time. It was like stocks, but instead of investing in tech companies, I was holding on to pieces of cardboard with sweaty basketball players on them. Meanwhile, my life? Completely unchanged. At least, that's what I made it look like. At home, I still played the broke college kid. I still drove my rusted-out Honda. I still let my dad complain about how I'd never amount to anything, while Emma rolled her eyes at me over dinner. But I had a plan. One night, I told my parents I got a job in another city and was moving out. Emma practically celebrated, thrilled at the thought of getting another room to herself. My parents, they barely looked up from their phones. About time, my dad muttered, "You're almost 18. How long did you think you were going to sit here for free?" No questions, no concern, just relief that I wouldn't be their problem anymore. Fine by me. A few weeks later, I closed on a small house in another city. Not a mansion, not some flashy estate, just a comfortable place that was all mine. I furnished it the way I wanted, stocked a fridge with food I actually liked, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel trapped. I also started traveling, nothing crazy, just places I'd never been. A weekend in Chicago, where I actually saw the Bulls play. A trip to Miami, where I sat on the beach and realized what actual relaxation felt like. It was weird having options, not having to plan every decision around what I could afford. And the best part? No one had a clue. They still treated me like the same guy who had to borrow $10 for gas. If only they knew. But I wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. And I had plans. Big ones. A couple of months after I moved, I got a call from Emma. That alone was suspicious. Emma never called unless she needed something. But this time, she sounded weirdly nice. Too nice. Said she missed me. Said the house felt empty without me. Then she dropped the bomb. She wanted me to come home for her birthday. A big family dinner. Just like old times. Yeah, right. My gut told me something was off. My family didn't do big family dinners. We did rush meals in front of the TV while my dad complained about work and my mom scrolled on her phone. And Emma? The last time she invited me to anything was when she needed me to drive her and her friend to a party because her car was in the shop. But I went anyway. Not because I believed any of it, but because I needed to know what was going on. When I got there, everything felt wrong. My parents were suddenly warm, welcoming. My dad actually smiled at me. My mom hugged me like she hadn't spent years acting like I was invisible. Emma acted like I was her long-lost best friend. That's when I knew. They knew. It wasn't until after dinner, when we were all sitting around the table, that Emma finally dropped the act. She pulled out her phone, slid across the table, and smirked. "So, want to tell us how you got rich?" I looked at the screen. There were pictures of me, my car, my house, even one of me sitting in a nice restaurant with a girl I'd been seeing. "My friend lives in your city?" Emma said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I asked her to check up on you. Guess what she found?" My hands clenched into fists. They had me cornered. They had proof, but they didn't have the truth. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my face neutral. I won the lottery. 500 grand. Lucky, right? Silence. Then my mom gasped. My dad whistled. Emma's eyes practically sparkled. And just like that, the switch flipped. Suddenly, I was special. My dad called me a smart kid for buying a lottery ticket. My mom said she always knew I'd do something amazing. Emma started listing things she could buy with our money. I let them talk. Let them build up their little fantasy. And then, inevitably came the demands. So, my dad said, clapping a hand on my shoulder, "How much are you giving to your family?" I almost laughed. Of course. That's what this was all about. You know, my mom chimed in, "Family supports each other. And after all we've done for you." I cut her off. Like, what? Silence again. They weren't expecting pushback. My dad cleared his throat. "We raised you, fed you, gave you a roof over your head. The least you could do is give back." Emma jumped in. "Yeah, you're acting so selfish. You have all this money, and you're just keeping it to yourself? That's not right." I shook my head, trying not to explode. "Let me get this straight. You ignored me my whole life, treated me like I didn't matter, told me I'd never be successful. And now that I have money, you suddenly care?" My dad's face darkened. "Watch your mouth. We're your family." "Are we?" My mom's eyes narrowed. Don't be ridiculous. We love you. No, you love my money. My dad slammed his fist on the table. You think you're better than us now? You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for us. We made you who you are. I exhaled slowly. I had expected this. The moment they realized they weren't getting a dime, the masks would come off. If you don't share with your family, my mom hissed, then you're not our son anymore. And there it was, the final nail in the coffin. I stood up, pushing my chair back. My hands weren't shaking anymore. If I'm only your son when I have money, then I don't want to be your son. My dad's face twisted in rage, but I didn't care. I walked the front door, grabbed my keys, and left. No yelling, no begging, just silence. That was the last time I ever stepped foot in that house. As I drove away, I didn't feel sad. I felt free. For the first time in my life, I was completely, truly free. After cutting ties with my family, I focused on what really mattered, building a life that was mine. No more guilt trips, no more feeling like an afterthought. Just me, my future, an insane opportunity that had landed in my lap. I finally did something I never thought possible. I applied to the college I had always wanted to go to. The kind of school my family laughed at when I mentioned it. You? There? They'd snicker. Good luck with that. Well, guess what? I got in. Walking onto that campus the first time, knowing I had gotten there on my own, felt better than any revenge could. It wasn't just about the degree. It was about proving to myself that I deserved to be there. And this time, no one could take it away from me. But school wasn't my only plan. With the money I had left, I started my own business. Something tied to what got me here in the first place. A high-end sports memorabilia company. It started small, just buying and reselling rare cards. But I had an eye for the market now. I knew how collectors thought, how they operated. I wasn't some clueless kid anymore. I was a player in the game. And business? It was good, really good. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I had my own apartment, a solid investment portfolio, and the freedom to actually enjoy life. I traveled, met new people, learned things about the world that my old life never prepared me for. I wasn't just some kid from a dead-end town anymore. I was someone with choices. Then, one day, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another scam or some car warning nonsense. But something made me pick up. Hello. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the words hit me like a brick. Did you know Mrs. Jenkins? My stomach dropped. It was her son. He told me she had passed away peacefully a few days ago. And then he said something I didn't expect. She had left something for me. She gave me an envelope with your name on it, he said. She told me if anything ever happened to her, I should send it to you. I barely remember giving him my address. My hands were shaking when the envelope arrived a few days later. It was simple, old-fashioned, like something from another era. Her handwriting was neat, but a little shaky, like she had taken her time with each letter. I opened it, and the moment I saw the first line, my throat tightened. If you're reading this, I suppose I'm with my husband now. Don't be sad about that. We had a good run. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep going. She wrote about how she had watched me grow up from afar, how she had seen the way my family treated me, and how she had known, deep down, that I was meant for something greater. I knew the cards would change your life. But more importantly, I knew you wouldn't let them change you. You have a good heart, Lucas. Don't ever forget that. Tears blurred the words on the page. I wiped them away, reading every last word, feeling every sentence like a punch to chest. Family isn't just the people you're born to. It's the people who see you, who believe in you when no one else does. I hope you found yours. I sat there for a long time, holding the letter like it was some kind of lifeline, and I realized something. She was right. My family wasn't the people I had left behind. My family was the people who had lifted me up when no one else cared. People like Mrs. Jenkins. People who saw worth in me before I even saw it in myself. That was the real lesson in all of this. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and put it in my desk drawer. For once in my life, I felt at peace. This was my life now, and I was finally free to live it. That night, I sat outside on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I thought about how much had changed, how much I had changed. I wasn't the kid from before. I had built something real, something mine, and I knew, deep down, that Mrs. Jenkins had been right all along. Family isn't always blood. It's the people who never stop believing in you, even when the world tells them they should.